I shall confess I haven't actually mastered half the things that have been written, but I will start by just my one line, which is that the sheer enormity of the research it hit me, and it really did hit me, because there's just so much of it. And one of the things that I said to Olives before we started was that just when I was looking at it, you know, you look at how much is there from Norway, you look at how much is there from Denmark, you look at how much is there from Germany, and when you actually put them together, then it's mind-blowing. China, mind-blowing. So I want to start, first of all, hello to all of you, and those of you who I don't know or who don't know me, please do introduce yourselves to me at lunchtime and afterwards. I'm a defence and security specialist by trade, and I've been doing that work for best part of the last 25 years after 37 years service in the military. And at the moment I'm a Ukraine specialist. So getting rid of the thank yous before we start. Thank you, Olives and Otto, for my room, which is absolutely magnificent, with the largest bed that I've been in for years. And with my specialist, I'm currently a specialist on Ukraine. And just so you all know, I have already been interviewed by Indian TV this morning. And I got one message as well from someone who said I was on Canadian TV last night. So my fame grows, but my fame about China doesn't. So we'll continue. You are the experts. I'm not. But I do have a long and varied exposure to China through military, business and sport. Sport, you ask. Well, I'm the only person here who's actually won a Chinese sports championships, I reckon. I was Hong Kong champion at 800 metres and 1500 metres in 1994. And I have to say, this juicy fact has got me many smiles and invites from Chinese ambassadors in the last 30 years. Oh, really, Glenn? Oh, Hong Kong champion. But yes, why is this important? Well, one of the things that was important was there were lots of students there on the 2 days of this competition. And when they weren't competing, when they weren't warming up, they were studying. So there was absolute silence in the stands. I've never been to a sports competition where there's been absolute silence, except some in Great Britain when there's nobody in the stands and you're just running on your own in the rain, as it usually does in Great Britain. But these kids were all sitting there studying in silence, like 100 of them. And I think that this is a really hard thing for my brain about China straight away, was this drive that I've not seen anywhere else. I've not seen anywhere else since or before. And what I want to do today is to actually to look through this, not look in detail, but actually to try and overview this whole thing that we've been talking about. And if I'm honest, after looking at it, what I would say is that about China, that what we have is a huge case of guesswork. We don't really know what's coming, either from China or from a stubborn but breaking Russia affecting China. But either way, I can be absolutely sure that the Russian war is going to bring a new world. And that is going to affect a lot of the things that have happened previously with China, and a lot of the things that we want to happen in the future with China. I don't believe that it can be business as usual after the war with Ukraine is finished. So somehow we need to separate the history of what has gone on with China from the future of how we see business and relationships with China in the coming years. And hopefully, all the people in this room, that you're all a lot better at that than I am. So what I'm asking you today, panelists and questioners, is not just to present a history of Chinese activity, of our Chinese activity with China from different countries, and not just looking back at what's happened, brilliant and wonderful though it is, but to try collectively by argument and discussion in our groups to pull out evidence of what you think is going to happen. What will our future of China be? And why? Based upon your research. Because I hope that after today we can actually show that we can bring some value to the China international analytical community by what we actually do today. Well, that's all of you, not me. But I want to continue in 3 steps. First, to tell some stories that have given me thoughts about China. Second, to discuss the military, because I have to. And then third, discuss some points that you've already raised and expose some of the questions that we should be able to answer, might be able to answer, might want to answer. So first of all, my stories. My Chinese friend in Shenzhen regularly tells me that he owns a small company in China. It's got 60 employees. In Latvia, this will be a substantial business. In Estonia, this will be a substantial business. Scale is everything in this discussion. We're not comparing like with like when we talk about Denmark or Norway or Sweden or any of the countries here, even Germany. We are not comparing like with like. We must never forget this. And I hope that some of you can bring some sense to this size part of the discussion. Because I think that that scale part is something that is often missed. Second story, I was UK Defence Attaché in Finland 1998 to 2001. And then again, I was Defence Attaché in Latvia 2002 to 2005. So when you're an attaché, one of the things you do is have lots of attaché meetings, and you meet, of course, the Chinese attaché. In my first tour, I became very good friends with the Chinese Defence Attaché in Finland. He was from aristocracy, the youngest of 8 brothers, 7 of whom were generals, and a couple who'd been on the Long March. So he had history on his side and against him, badly. He was, as he liked to tell me often, only a senior colonel, which of course in the Chinese army, only a senior colonel means that in the German forces he's a corporal, because they don't have sergeants. So he's a junior rank as a colonel. He had no staff car and driver like I had, which is quite interesting from a large country like that. And he confessed to me that he was paid too little to actually own his own car in Finland. So he didn't go. For the grand opening of the Baltic Defence College in Tartu, thank you Germany for all your support on that, and Denmark for allowing us to have the general to open it and run it. He went by bus from Tallinn to Tartu, over the ferry and then by bus. This is our senior colonel. So I offered him a lift back in my car, and we sat there and we chatted. And I got several things from that trip. One thing was that he was completely clueless about NATO, the West, and our ideology. I mean, senior colonel he may have been, very intelligent he may have been, aristocratic he may have been, but the conceptual framework that we exist in was not a conceptual framework that he understood. He'd still got this sort of thing that lots of people have, that, you know, NATO is an all-powerful organization that tells everybody what to do. Not a collection of a rabble of countries that pester America to death on a daily basis. For him, the US was the great Satan. It was the great Satan. He loved the American attaché. He could differentiate these things clearly in his brain. The American attaché and the American other 3 attachés, because there were 4 in Finland, he loved them all. He thought they were great, but America was the great Satan. And of course, one thing I learned very quickly was that you can't be a spy without a car. So it doesn't matter how good he was, if he was paid to be a spy, he was going to be a pretty useless one if he had to beg lifts and go on buses from Tallinn to Tartu. Interestingly, and the thing that stuck with me ever since, was he told me that China can never have democracy because it would make the country uncontrollable. It was simply too large with too many nationalities inside. He was passionate about this. And when I say passionate, I mean passionate. And he came back to it. In that journey, 3 or 4 times he talked about it. He was determined that I should understand this, that democracy was not for China. But I felt with him a sort of like a deep-seated insecurity about his view of China and its place in the world, which stuck with me. During the trip and during our time in the 3 years we were together, he rarely treated me as an equal, treating me more as if I was a senior officer. Now this, of course, may be part of their cultural thing that as a senior colonel, he's quite junior in the Chinese army, but he never did. It was always like, sir. And it wasn't just a case of politeness. It felt like deference to me. And it was something that came back to me afterwards when I was defense attaché in Latvia, and I'll mention that again. Now, for fun, the fun part, in Finland we had an attaché's biathlon ski competition, which we did every year. We have to shoot. The Chinese attaché's assistant was also in the attaché's group. He was a funny little man. He was not military. He was a political advisor with no military training, having come straight to the job from military university. He was hugely unfit and was thin to the point of looking malnourished and with very ill-fitting uniform. They obviously gave him the first uniform that was available, and it did not fit, and it showed. You couldn't mistake him for anything other than what he was, which was a political minder in the defense section. But he was bright, more intelligent than most, and I liked him and got on well with him. So on one winter's day, on my second year there, he rang me at the embassy and asked for a meeting just with him and not with the attaché present. So being sensitive to these things and worrying about security, I went to the ambassador and said, "Sir, this is strange. Do you mind if I go?" He said, "Delighted. Go and come back and tell me, what on earth does he want?" So we met for lunch. It was nothing military, it was nothing security. It ran something like this: "Oh, Glenn, help me beat attaché in ski competition. Attaché does not like me and abuses me. I need to beat him." So, coaching skiing is an activity of mine. So for the next couple of weeks in the evenings, the attaché's assistant and I did ski training in Paloheina night track in central Helsinki. And I persuaded the Finnish military to take him quietly away somewhere and teach him to shoot, which they did. So on the day, he came third, behind myself and the Norwegian attaché. It was worth every minute of my time. The attaché, his face, the hate was wondrous to see. So if the attaché ever gets to hear about this, I sincerely apologize, but it had to be done. But again, what did I learn? The extreme ordinariness, or shall I say normalness, of the Chinese people in that embassy and their motivations. No different from us. Just the same sort of stuff going on there as we had. And in the embassy, they clearly had no coherence organizationally. It was not some super firm plotting the downfall of the West. It was, in fact, a just pretty normal embassy of just people doing their job, good bits and bad bits. In 2006, after I left the army, I spent a year as an advisor to Jürgen Ligi, the defense minister in Estonia. He visited China during my working there. Sadly, I didn't get to go on the visit because there were only 3 places, and finances were limited. But before the visit, the Chinese attaché in Estonia asked to meet me privately, and straight up came and asked what he should do about the visit. He was extremely worried, and he confessed to me that he was extremely worried. And by the way, he also came with his assistant, who was equally small and thin, and equally a politico, not a military person. First, the attaché admitted to me they had no relationship with the Estonian MOD other than the formal group attaché visits. And they were simply too embarrassed to show this both to the MOD and, more importantly, back to their ambassador and to their MOD. And, of course, the General Staff in Beijing. And he trusted me because the attaché in Finland had told him I was a good guy. So they do actually still speak to each other. Now, I briefed him that Jürgen Liegi, my minister, was an interim minister, which he was, and was going to be finance minister in the next government. And that actually his interest lay not in soldiering, which didn't bother him at all, and he was not going to be interested in looking at lots of Chinese soldiers, but more how China functioned financially. In the event, the defense minister of China also happened to like finance and stayed with Jürgen for 3 full days, flying him all over China in the Ministry of Defense ministerial jet, which is something apparently they had only ever done in the past for USA. So I was struck again by this extreme lack of self-confidence of the officials when dealing with the West, and that in many ways their culture was trumping how they were supposed to do their job properly. And I felt the huge uncertainty on their part about how a country like Estonia then fitted into the greater scheme of things. It was, in my mind, I had the feeling that because Estonia was going into, no, it had just gone into NATO actually, gone into NATO, that therefore it was part of the big system. So they weren't actually taking a visitor from Estonia, but they were taking a visitor who was like an emissary from America or an emissary from NATO. So they viewed the whole thing differently. So to end my stories and to bring us up to date, I've been organising, apart from COVID times, business networking events in Riga twice a year for the last 12 years. And we've had a good response from China, including regular business people coming from Shenzhen. And in May 2019, we had 10 visitors from there, out of the 200 people who came to the conference. And one of them was a billionaire technology industrialist, and he was making many new products for the cinema industry. But you have to note that the visits were initiated and made successful, not by the embassy trade people, as you would expect, possibly, but by a private citizen living in Riga looking to do business. And in these networking events, I always had time to chat in the evening after the event with delegates in the after party. And I was always struck by the feeling of ordinariness and lack of worldliness in the visitors. They were charming and great to talk to as well. But the trade staff who came were not really positive and had less grasp or interest of what was happening beyond what they could get from the internet. And a few questions showed they'd not visited anywhere and were not organised and were only going to things that were organised for them by the respective Latvian ministries. They weren't actually being proactive and going out and pushing for trade. In short, what I came away with from these things was that the private business from China was dynamic, but the official system was not so. In fact, I had the feeling that they saw our events actually as a nuisance rather than the opportunity to meet Latvian business. Maybe that was the scale again. Maybe Latvia is just too small to count if you're China. And I would add that this was in stark contrast to the Indians who attended our seminars in even larger numbers, who were upfront, dynamic and active as people. They all wanted to speak and pushed us hard. Culture is everything. I'm left with this, that there's clearly a strong desire by the Chinese to do business and an appetite for risk and potential long-term benefits. But only a few times in several years of our business networking did anyone ever mention the Belt and Road Initiative. And the only really serious time was by the Chinese ambassador to Latvia in a very weak and very formal, formulaic speech he gave to us at 2018 in the conference. So how do I see China as a military threat to us here in Europe? For me, the military aspects of Western security against China for US rest upon the simple question of if they have the confidence and self-belief in their conventional military to try an adventure. They're big enough. Just like Russia, they can cause untold harm just by numbers. They've missiles to cause chaos, just as Russia does daily in Kharkiv. But they've not been to war. That's in a long time. And their ships, soldiers and pilots are clearly trained to do skills, but not trained for any level of quality for warfighting. They suffer badly from a dominating and stultifying top-down command culture, just the same as Russia does. So what sort of motivation they would show in a fight, Taiwan or anywhere else, is uncertain. And I don't see them joining Russia in this war, but I do see them looking closely at the strength of resolve of the West on behalf of Ukraine and against Russia. I think that our messaging here is vital. But they will also be assessing if the conflict is making the West short of military resources, which of course we know it is, and critically so in some areas like anti-tank and low-level air defence now, that we just simply cannot regenerate in the next couple of years. But because of their culture and their natural lack of confidence that I've already mentioned, I would be very surprised if their intelligence overall, their intelligence system, has the capacity to grasp the overall condition of NATO. They will have to manage by what they read and what they see on the internet. Should they decide to do any adventurism in NATO, however, in Asia, however, for example, towards Taiwan or Japan, that involves the USA, then I cannot see how any European country that wants a long-term commitment from the US can afford not to join in. Just the same as Iraq. It will be a coalition of the willing. And that is a big question for all of us, is how willing are we to face up to China? Full prizes to Lithuania, who appears to be doing it quite successfully at the moment, while others are a bit more worried. But I wouldn't bet anything against Russia trying to bring China into the war by doing something stupid in the East. As this war goes on, and if China goes under pressure, Russia goes under pressure, I would look eastward to see if they're going to do something there. It is challenging to judge what today China is learning from the Russia-Ukraine war. Roger suggests that they're gaining from Russian intelligence and weapons, and it's a serious thought. I wonder if it's truly so, because the Russians have shown little intelligence grasp so far, as their defense culture is one of lying, and they certainly don't understand what is going on at the top. Captured Russian soldiers attest to the fact that their commanders are trying to sell a better battle picture than actually exists on the front line. Was it ever thus, by the way? I'm sure when I was there I was doing the same. Heaven knows what Putin really thinks is happening. So if he and Shoigu are adrift, then anything they pass to China will also be adrift. And the Russians' weapons and equipment sold to China are turning out actually to be pretty shitty. In short, huge amounts of money has been well wasted by China. India has cut back her arms purchases from Russia sharply. I wonder if China will also, because she still has quite a few in the pipeline. I was particularly struck in the draft report by the history of the German attempts to engage the Chinese military, and whoever wrote that from Germany, most of it was really interesting to me. It was the first time I'd heard it. What struck me most was, just like the attempts of Western countries to engage Russia, it had the same feel to it. We got the same responses. And arguably the responses were also the same in Europe in the last 20 years from US attempts to help Eastern Europe reform. And I think that that is because what was being hidden was that the forces were inadequate and not ready to be seen, rather than anything else. The fact that Chinese will exercise with Russia, who have poor quality forces and equipment, likely says more than we realize about the Chinese. And that draws me back to my original point about if China has the confidence to use something that may not be good enough to be used. But of course, like Putin, the leadership in China may not know what quality they have and go ahead with the war anyway. Going back to less military subjects, the big question for me after reading the reports is how much we in the West have an appetite for exposure to China. Will the finance and trade on offer trump the human rights problems? Having a relationship with China is a serious challenge, and one that is not going to go away. You cannot magic away the suggested population of 14 million, 1,414 million Chinese by the end of this year. And this population is growing, and their appetite for a better life is growing equally, arguably faster than the government can deliver. They all want to do their thing. The historic Chinese mercantile culture, love of gambling and risk, and growing dissatisfaction with home, dissatisfaction with a home that has many problems, means that more and more are likely to want to go into the world to find their purpose and business. There was talk at lunch yesterday between Chris and Linus about the strength of resolve of the EU, what instruments they would or could produce in terms of shaping the environment and security control in terms of exposure to China. I am not at all sure that international discussions on this have either been wide or deep enough. For example, the 5G and Huawei discussions over the last years were basic at best. But thanks to US again, these discussions did act as a wake-up call for all of us, and for UK at least, indicated that the Chinese money has greased many more political palms than was realised. And I hope that in the panels that this subject will be beaten out a bit more. And the big question from this for me is this difference between governments and their security apparatuses and normal Chinese business people in society who just want to make an honest buck, however honest is in their way of looking at it. Are we looking at Mr. Wong as a potential business partner, friend, and even future countryman, or as a tool of an authoritarian government hell-bent on destroying our culture and imposing their own? That's a serious question. What I've seen so far in Riga with the tiny number of Chinese we have there is that they want to integrate, and they love the quiet, lack of people in cars, and the open country spaces. All things they can't get at home. The youngsters there, the Chinese youngsters, have grasped that they have freedom. And when I talk to them, they talk about it. But I don't want to seem naive, but it does strike me that if we take the US view of China as the great enemy, do we run the risk of creating a monster that we don't want? Have we got the wit to deal with this beast? Olevs and Otto have both raised the opportunities and risks associated with joint research and development, which is a big area. The risk, of course, being industrial espionage. I visited Turku University last month, and in the new materials lab, run incidentally and ironically by a Russian, I met Chinese graduate students who were beavering away at research on metals, wood and composites. They pay to be there. Do we want them or not? And how do we judge them? I don't have an answer for this. I hope that some of you people in the room have some more serious thoughts than that. I was just intrigued and surprised to see how many there were, and to see also, I have to say this, to see the brightness of their faces. Graduate students doing research, bright, bubbly, smiley, and wanting to show what they were doing. But it's the interplay between technological development, the finance world, and the use of the term China as a generalization that raises for me the big questions. It's obvious that Chinese banks need to support Chinese business abroad. If the money is spent only in China, then the GDP cannot really grow. The imports, especially raw material resources they need to feed the Chinese beast and its burgeoning middle class, are huge. To balance this, they must export and earn money. They have huge liquidity in the trillions of US dollars, and to avoid losing value, their money must go somewhere. And where better than technology companies in Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Finland, or tech superpower Estonia? This cannot all be espionage or government controlled. There is no organization capable in the world of managing such a huge investment as this across the whole of this area. But at least our governments are now realizing the security implications of such a huge investment. And one point raised was that the Baltics and Nordics should create their own policy approach to dealing with this security challenge. But can or even this sort of idea of a policy approach for Baltics and Nordics be outside of the EU and possible EU-US policy approach? Is a separate northern policy approach sustainable or sensible? Or do we actually need a Western policy approach for this? Belt and Road Initiative has also been an interesting initiative for the West. I really wish I'd thought of Belt and Road first, before the Chinese. It was designed as a global infrastructure project to bolster trade flows from China to Europe along what was the old Silk Road. The maps show a spread of interest from the Northern Sea route around Russia to India and Northeast Africa in the south. At the same time, China has also expanded its Belt and Road ambitions with the introduction of a digital Silk Road, the Polar Silk Road, Health Silk Road, and a 5G-based Internet of Things project, Silk Road. And China aims to take a lion's share of the fiber optic cable market. Fiber optics are something that our daily internet connections with the US rely on, and much of our security systems as well. These things will shape the economics and geopolitics for decades to come, and they have wide-ranging implications for our security. And again, on this matter of discussion, I haven't seen anything in reading generally that it discusses these things with the level of seriousness that they actually need. It's hard to argue for success of the Belt and Road at the moment because it's been hampered badly by the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2014 and now again this year. The question is, what value do we get from it, and how much risk are we willing to take on security issues with Belt and Road? I would ask our infrastructure group, is that potential value to us not worth Western investment, not just Chinese investment? Should US and European attitudes to China change the picture on how we see Belt and Road? Because arguably we need our end of Belt and Road as much as China needs her end of Belt and Road. Because we need some project to link us with emerging and arguably rich Central Asian republics, with the billion-plus population of India, and with Africa, not only with China. Do we really need dodgy Chinese money for something we need to do anyway? So I'm left to ask, finally, does China really have the tools for world domination as much as the evidence seems to show? Are we in danger of being overwhelmed by the sheer size of the opportunistic business desires of China throughout our region? Is there in the EU and US, apart from us all here today, a real and all-encompassing grasp of the sheer size of the Chinese business thrust into Denmark, Norway, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Germany? When seen individually, each country thinks it can manage its own. When seen as a group and seen in totality, it is a monstrous amount of business and a monstrous amount of investment into the north. Is it possible that the Chinese beast is actually overreaching itself and is simply too normal and too human to be the superpower that the US wants and needs it to be as an enemy. The whole engagement is clearly complex, but China is here today and is here to stay. It's got huge money and huge power, and it's not going to go away. We have to deal with it as it is: culture, money, problems, and all. How do we balance the sensible needs of good business with the risks of giving away the crown jewels? As Matty wrote in his report, is China trying to expand politically to create, and his quote, a world safe for autocracy? And is that their aim? Or is it that they realise that the survival of their country demands expansive economic projects like Belt and Road and tunnels for Estonia and Finland that are commensurate with the size and available resources? How much of the dealings we have now and will have in the future are government driven, or how much of this is normal Chinese business that just happens to come our way? I think that what we need from today are policy recommendations. All our agencies need this: the EU, Nordics, Baltic, US, and individual countries. What do we think in this room they should do? How do we think in this room they should think? You people are the experts. And I will finish by saying, I have personally no clue what policy suggestions we should make other than to be careful, because some of these things are extremely complex and clever. Ukraine, I can do it. China, not. But I'm hoping that you can. If you can't, then I think, frankly, we're all in for a seriously rocky future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grant, for your keynote speech. Now we would have time for a few questions. Let's start with Mr. Nickers and then perhaps someone else in the audience, please.
Thanks, Otto. Thank you. Thanks, Glenn, for your excellent presentation. This is really the scale and this volume and this weight. This is so massive what we're getting in terms of China's presence and in the region and in Europe. So my question is that it will be related with Ukraine. So how do you think everything which is going now in Ukraine is affecting everything that is ongoing and possibly will go on with China?
Thanks. I think you've got to look at this at both ends. At both ends. I mean, I think that our end, then it depends completely what happens with Russia. And if Russia fails from our end, then there's going to be what's facing the West is going to change dramatically, and there's going to be a completely different set of geopolitical relationships, and that offers China a huge space for filling up where Russia has been in the past, whether that's as the enemy or whether it's as a friend, whether it's in business or anything else. It will still offer space, especially in the reconstruction of Ukraine. I mean, is the West actually going to refuse Chinese money for reconstruction in Ukraine? It's going to be a really, really hard thing to do, especially if that is not government money, but it's small investors, medium-sized investors. And just think, even if you're talking small investors from China, a small investor in China still has more money than SEB Bank in Latvia is willing to lend anybody. Just think about that. Put those terms. That SEB Bank, our biggest bank in Latvia, loans less than a Chinese investor, small one. So the scale of this, and when they come in and they go to Ukraine and they say, okay, we're going to help you rebuild X town or Y town or these bridges or whatever else, will Ukraine be able to resist them? will the offers from the Western countries trump that money? Looking at the other end for China, then because if Russia loses, then China is presented with the greatest opportunity geopolitically that it's had for the last 1,000 years. It's got a chance to take over the right-hand side of Russia. If not in physical terms, but certainly in financial terms, if that side of Russia wants to rebuild. I mean, if you see the pictures of Vladivostok on Google, go and look at it. I mean, it's in shit state. It really is. It's a total and utter mess. It's dead. So, you know, Chinese money into Vladivostok, frankly, they can take it over. If Russia Central is not there to actually to do anything, China can actually eat its way across the east side of Russia just with a checkbook. Here I am. And nobody's going to stop them, because don't tell me US, you know, Denmark, nice Norway with all its money, are going to do anything over in the east side of Russia, because they're not. So it's an opportunity for China that they will not get again, probably. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Sir at the back.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. I found this thought very interesting. You've described it in a very competitive way with regard to Ukraine. Could you also imagine that China's influence, and especially the financial opportunities they have, could also have a stabilizing influence, that it could be to a certain degree in our interest? I'm especially thinking about the current Afghanistan scenario, where potentially maybe Chinese investments could help to influence Afghanistan in a way that that presents a more acceptable scenario for us.
That's a good question. I think I want to defer that to Roger when he does his speech, because I think that finance and the balance of that fight and the value and what is being done with that finance, he understands a lot better than me. If you can pick that one up this afternoon, thank you. Yeah. Because you ask the experts, not me. I'm not the expert.
No.
Next.
So, would we have any other questions? If so, yes. So, the one and then first.
Jarosław Bajaczyk from Embassy of Poland. Thank you. It was very interesting indeed. I wanted to pick up on your first answer, because you said you kind of described and painted the picture what kind of opportunities would arise for China if Russia fails in Ukraine. But what happens if there is no failure of Russia in Ukraine? What kind of opportunities then for China, or challenges appear?
Right, this is off the top of my head, because I really have not thought about this in any depth. That is actually really quite a clever question. And I mean, it presents China with an opportunity to be a good guy, especially in and around, you know, maybe the rump of Ukraine or something like this, and to balance out against Russia at that stage. But my thought then would be is, do they have the wit in China to actually to try and be a good guy? I don't think they do at the moment. I think that they don't see these things as opportunities for goodness. I think that the overall hate of America is so much at the power level that they can't see beyond that into the possibility of helping Ukraine in a nice way, you know, regenerate or whatever it is, or balancing out against Russia. I mean, they're not doing so at the moment, unless someone knows something I don't know. And if they're not doing it now, I don't see that they'll do it again. You have a better answer than me.
So we had okay. So.
But it's a good question. It's a good question. It's a really good, because the world will change.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up a bit on your question. So recently, as a Boehm Institute, we went to Georgia, actually twice recently, Due to Chinese and Russian influences developing in Georgia, of course, we all remember the war in 2008. So I was wondering whether, like the Georgian example, cannot be analyzed as a potential, future scenario, what's going on with what will happen, in terms of Ukrainian-Chinese relations. And what we found out through also our partners in Georgia is that China is somehow balancing the Russian influences. So it's not like, of course, there are like multiple theses whether Russia and China are working together or whether they work against each other or whether they tolerate. So the answer from our Georgian partners was that they kind of tolerate each other, but at the same time, China is balancing the Russian influences. So this is positive, but on the flip side, China is kind of stabilizing political pathologies. So when you asked about, what's the danger or the threat of China, like for Baltic regions, I would say it's not only, connected to the nation, but it's about China tolerating and stabilizing not democratical practices. So, the main influence of China is that it is stabilizing political pathologies and stabilizing the political elites that are not democratic, or that they look towards human rights, etc. So I think we could have a big discussion on this topic, but I believe we can learn a lot from the experience of Georgia and from the experience of some of the Central Asian countries in this regard. Thank you.
I think that's
so one
really good point. It's a really good point.
Hello, I'm Søren Dosenrode. I head the Regional International Studies in Aalborg. I just have a comment. First of all, I liked it very much what you told. It was very interesting. It's an extremely complex situation we have at the moment. Russia is definitely right at the doorstep, and it's a problem now. China is the strategic problem, I would say. What you told about scale, I think we tend to forget scale. I mean, it's huge. China is huge. And what they did by their cultural revolution, forget that, but what they've been able to do with leveling up their economy is marvelous, taking out millions of people from poverty. So there is a strength there. And then you talked about what can we do, asked about that. And if you look at the EU, I mean, the problem is it's been extremely hard for us, the EU, to get its act together. I mean, there's been so many interests. It looks now as if the EU is slowly moving towards a more cautious approach to China. You saw in 2017 there was an idea about we should scan investment from Chinese investments, often from state-backed firms. The Nordic countries said no, we will not. We need free trade. And now one has seen that it's actually not good enough. So even the Nordic countries are now accepting that you have to be able to scan Chinese investments. And I think that's the way the EU will have to work. And then, of course, the EU will have to take a look at the international system. It was so easy when we had a unipolar system with one pole, the US, having more or less our ideals, values, and this kind of stuff. I'm, at the moment in my research, looking into the international system as it is now. Where is it moving? The question is it multipolar? Yes, well, it is, because you have the US, China, and Russia. They are all great powers. US superpower, but still you have three great powers. And then the European question is, what should we do? Should we be some kind of free land museum, or should we be another pole in a very anarchic, unstable world? So the European question is, should we unite, or should we stay as we are? Japan seemingly is on the way up right now, militarily, economically, and all that. So we are in a multipolar system, and it places and multipolar system by definition are extremely unstable. So the great question for Europe is, should we take that giant leap, which probably few European countries would like, but still, should we unite and become the fourth or fifth pole, or should we not? Thank you.
Can I just add one bit to that? Thank you. Which is, and I didn't talk about it because it was just too bloody complex for my brain, which is does this, because of the power of China and the growth of China, does that mean that we should reshape NATO? And if you've got anybody in here who's good at this sort of thing, then please, I'd be delighted to hear during the day some thoughts. Because, I mean, the China pulls the whole dynamic out of shape. Previously, it was, we were quite clear. It was, NATO, Russia. And now it's not. It's NATO, Russia, and China. And on the other side of the world, we've got 4 countries that we badly need in NATO. Poland, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, and Australia. And maybe Vietnam. But yeah, maybe. But these and also possibly Chile, because the world is changing and the dynamics are changing, and so therefore our security apparatus also needs to change, in my view. I haven't written anything about it. I've just been thinking about it for the last 5 years, but it's too heavy on my brain still. But if anybody's got any thoughts on that, then, sir, it's over to you.
Yeah, well, I'm Brigadier General Jacobinus. I'm the Danish Defense Attaché here in town. I wouldn't say I'm an expert in this, but I would say that these countries you mentioned are, to a large extent, already partners with NATO. But I'm not convinced that there is a real appetite among the soon 32 NATO members to expand NATO with those countries to becoming real members. But what we see is also that a number of existing NATO countries do have developed their own Indo-Pacific strategies, or in this country, light Linien, in which Germany is now stepping into its second phase these days with implementing or practically implementing their Indo-Pacific strategy. So my comment is just, I think we are seeing more and more Western engagement, also militarily and security-wise, in the Indo-Pacific, indirectly or more or less directly or indirectly, depending on the country you focus on, to contain too much Chinese aggression.
The big problem, sir, on that is whether the sheer weight, as we said, the scale of China, whether those thin threads from the western side countries are strong enough to balance out what the heavyweight China on the other side in security terms, or whether we do need to think about something different. But yeah, you're right. There are things happening, especially now with the nuclear submarines with US, UK, Australia, and things like that. Anybody else? Can I be released?
So indeed, thank you, Mr. Grant. Thank you for the keynote speech and the wonderful discussion that we had. Now let us proceed with the next part of our program, which would be